Hello, welcome back to my channel. So we're reading Smart Money Tribe by Arese. It's the second book in the Smart Money Woman collection. So please don't forget to like and subscribe. We're currently in chapter 1. In the previous chapter, that was the prologue, we're introduced to where each of the characters are at a point of their lives, at major points in their lives. So now chapter 1. Broke again. Lara. I think she should be buried in her wedding dress. Lara raised her head to see who had made that ridiculous suggestion. Of course, Auntie Kechi. You think she should be buried in her wedding dress? Lara repeated. Her sarcastic tone obviously lost on her Igbo relative. Yes, what is wrong with that? Our mother was buried in her wedding dress, and it was a very elegant affair. Auntie Nkechi said matter-of-factly, her nose pointed in the air. Of course, of her mother's 3 siblings, Auntie Nkechi was the eldest of the 3, always the loudest in the room, and definitely the most difficult. Lara could also never understand why her auntie insisted on speaking in a grating, obviously fake American accent that was layered over the thick Igbo pronunciation she had clearly been raised with. To the best of her knowledge, there was no valid explanation for the awful intonation, because her auntie hadn't left the shores of Nigeria until she had been in her 50s and went to Texas to do omugo for her son's wife. The last few months of planning her son's funeral made her life seem like something out of a low-grade Nollywood movies. Her mother's only brother had come in from Anambra State the night before and insisted they had an emergency meeting at her house. A meeting that had lasted 4 hours already. The elders are not happy with you at all, Lara, Uncle Festus said sternly. They want the burial to be taking place in Obunike, in our father's compound. It is tradition. You have to do things the right way. Burying her in Lagos should not even be an option. Uncle Festus, I'm sorry you came all this way to discuss something that had already been decided weeks ago, Lara said calmly, trying not to let the anger she felt show. It would come across as disrespectful. Is it me you are talking to like that? You are boldly telling me you decided about my own sister without my consent, or the consent of the elders for that matter. Uncle Festus slapped his hand and shook his head in disbelief. You young people of nowadays, you think you know everything. I apologize, Uncle. Lara looked at him, who, apart from the rare village holidays she had very little contact with over the years. He seemed genuinely offended that he didn't have a say in the funeral arrangement of a woman he had barely spoken to in years, or less the frequent financial assistance. At this point, Uncle Festus was gesticulating wildly as he strolled around her living room, dishing out instructions on tradition this, tradition that, for all intents and purposes, were alien to her. Festus, please don't come here and cause confusion. We already settled this matter last month and decided that Adanna should be buried in Lagos. Auntie Nkechi interjected, standing up to deliver her own lecture. After all, that's what Adanna would have wanted, a classy Lagos funeral. I mean, how many times did she even go to the village? Lagos is where she had become accustomed to in the last 25 years. It is where her friends are. It is where her church is. And I'm sure she would want to be buried close to her children. Besides, we have almost settled on a casket, and Lara has already made a deposit on a plot of land in Ikoyi Cemetery. Sorry. They sell plots in Ikoyi Cemetery. Even though I think Adanna would have preferred to be buried in a vault and gardens, Auntie Kechi ended her mini tirade. tirade with a disgruntled huff. Lara looked at the duo, now at each other's throats. To a passerby, these were two people who loved their late sister profoundly and were very passionate about her final resting place, because they each believed that they knew what she would have wanted. Interestingly, Auntie Former, the youngest of the remaining three siblings, had been sitting quietly on the sofa in the corner and had barely volunteered any opinion since this tedious meeting had started. It was a touch ironic because, of the three, she had been the closest to Lara's mom. She tended to reserve her opinion until after the meeting, where she would then offer Lara gentle counseling. For instance, the week before, Auntie Nkechi had announced that she had picked the ashwabi the family were going to wear and informed Lara that it would cost guests 150,000 naira each. But Lara had to put a deposit down of 600,000 naira before the supplier would set it aside. It had taken everything in her not to scream, and luckily, Auntie Ifeoma had been there to diffuse the situation. You shouldn't have spoken to Nkechi like that. She means well. She just has a different approach. Auntie Ifeoma told her diplomatically after Lara had snapped at her older aunt. Make your point, Lara, but don't be rude. Your mother would have never approved of that. In the last couple of months, Lara had learned that when it came to death, everyone had their own agenda. Aside from Auntie Ifeoma, nobody cared what she wanted or had even bothered to ask how the funeral was going to be funded. As she looked around to her dimly lit living room and watched the shouting match in front of her, frustration began to set in. When should I expect your financial contribution to the funeral? Lara suddenly asked. How do you mean? Uncle Festus responded, his Igbo accent thicker than ever. She means, how much are you contributing, Festus? And when should she expect the money? Auntie Ifeoma interjected, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Nkechi, Ngwanu, what about you? Auntie Ifeoma challenged her older sister. There was silence in the room, and Lara couldn't help but smile. Auntie Ifeoma was the quiet one, but when she decided to speak, she went for the jugular. The girl is asking a valid question, Auntie Ifeoma continued. Nkechi, for months I have heard you volunteer unsolicited opinions and suggestions, expensive options, as though Lara had an unlimited bank account or a tree in the backyard where she plucked money. I will not be insulted, Ifeoma. Auntie Nkechi stood up from the cream leather sofa that she had been sitting on all night, marching to the center of the room and stabbing her index finger in Ifeoma's face. You have obviously forgotten that we are not mates, she screamed. How dare you? Nkechi, nobody is insulting you, Auntie Ifeoma responded calmly. This is not about mate or no mate. It's just a simple question, my sister. How much are you contributing to the funeral cost? Or is Nedu sending dollars from Texas? Her tone had suddenly become mischievous. Please leave my son out of this, Auntie Nkechi shouted. Is it his mother that we are burying? She tried to deflect. Ah, but it is your sister that is being buried now, Nkechi. It's your sister, Auntie Ifeoma repeated firmly. After all, when you were saying only the best copy for Adana, she mimicked Auntie Nkechi's facial expression. An awful accent to perfection. Who did you think was going to pay for it? You that you are talking. How much are you contributing? Uncle Festus demanded pompously. Lara watched the exchange in bemusement. All three were all in their 50s, but here and now, they were no different from her and her siblings. For your information, I've given Lara 250,000 so far, and I know that my contribution will do nothing to dent the mounting cost of the funeral. Even so, I have no opinions on where my sister should be buried, she said, looking pointedly at Uncle Festus. Or how extravagantly she should be buried, she added as she turned to face Nkechi. What exactly are you playing at, Ifoma? Auntie Nkechi spat through her pursed lips as she clapped both her hands in exaggerated manner. Auntie Ifoma stared at her. So you mean you went behind my back to give Lara money for our sister's funeral, eh, Ifoma? Are you trying to make us look bad? Make you look bad? Auntie Ifoma laughed. How can doing my bit to help out my niece with the little I can constitute making you look bad? It's called being a decent human being. You should try it sometime. We both know Adana would roll in her grave if she knew the undue pressure you are putting on her children to spend money they don't have, especially in time of grief. What do you mean money they don't have? Uncle Festus said from his self-appointed throne, speaking for the first time since the money exchange began. Look at this big house Lara lives in. Lekki Phase 1, one of the most expensive parts of Lagos. How can you say she doesn't have money? She works in oil and gas, for crying out loud. Abi Lara, why are you fooling? Is it mean that he's just managing to pay my bills in Enugu that should foot the bills of your mother's funeral? Now she's her mother's funeral. She'll be shouting, my sister, my sister. Back Jerry. Lara winced, but remained silent. Festus, so we can't expect you to contribute money, but we can expect you to come to Lagos to dictate how Adana should be buried, Auntie Ifoma asked. So, because I'm not rich Ifoma, I cannot educate my niece on what traditions expect from us. Uncle, I don't know if you have been reading the papers, but the oil and gas company I work for has been having issues with the regulator, and we are in trouble. I have not been paid a salary for 4 months. Hi, Mama. I have not been paid a salary for 4 months, and between Mom's cancer treatment and the mounting cost of funeral, I'm broke. Her uncle arranged his face in some semblance of sympathy. Sorry to hear that, Lara, he said solemnly. It is well, but I'm sure you have savings. You've been working for a long time, my dear, and I'm sure you've made a lot of money over the years. There must be money you have saved somewhere that you can use to give your mother a befitting burial. Exactly. Auntie Nkechi chimed in. Oh, shut up. Auntie Ifoma rolled her eyes. Yeah, my expression exactly. Ifoma what? We are just advising her. Auntie Nkechi responded. Is it a crime? Yes, I have savings, Uncle, Lara explained. I have been living on those savings for the last few months. I have had to liquidate several investments just to meet up with the cost of Mom's specialist treatment and funeral arrangements. In fact, I'm not quite sure if I still have a job because of the company's remaining assets are on lien, and we've barely been operational this month because of the liquidity issues. Auntie Ifoma hissed in derision at her brother and sister. This is ridiculous. You people are stressing this girl. She picked up her bag and walked out of the room, leaving Uncle Festus and Auntie Ikechi to continue arguing. As Lara watched, she understood that all of this drama was just to deflect from the real issue. They did not want to contribute financially to the funeral they had so many opinions about. Next, Zuri. As she walked down the hall towards the conference room, Zuri could feel the toll her trip had taken on her body, but she also felt strangely energized. She was about 5 minutes late for the meeting, but she had to stop and freshen up in the bathroom. because she felt a hot mess. She had changed into a grey, no fuss pinafore style shift dress with a white shirt that was slightly rumpled but presentable. Sorry I'm late, Zuri apologized as she walked into the conference room. As she took her seat, Mr. Tunde stood up and started a slow, dramatic clap, and the rest of the room joined in. She had just returned from a week-long trip that had that took her to two countries on two continents, trying to secure financing for a new middle-income housing development she was she was spearheading for Richmond. She had been living out of her suitcase and running from one meeting to the other, but she couldn't complain because 2 years ago this was the life she prayed for. Work she enjoyed, international travels, and feeling like a valuable member of a thriving organization. Welcome back, superstar, Mr. Tunde said. This young lady has spent the last 6 months trying to secure financing for our latest development, and yesterday she succeeded in closing a deal that will bring $5 million in funding for the project. To be honest, I had my doubts during the process, but our girl pulled it off. Months before, Zuri had been looking into how Richmond could help solve the problem of affordable housing, and she had become fascinated with a middle class neighborhood called Yaba, which was situated in the heart of Lagos, between the mainland and Victoria Island. With the work of Lagos State Government, with the work that Lagos State Government was doing in the area, it was much cleaner and safer and ripe for that kind of development. Zuri had suggested to Mr. Tunde that Yaba would be an ideal location for a gated community with affordable housing that catered to young workers, students, and the growing tech community in the area. The partners had been skeptical due to the enormous capital outlay that would be required, as well as the fact that they would prefer to cater to a customer base with a more substantial purchasing power. However, Zuri had presented a business plan to the board that laid out cheaper financing options, partnering with a construction company that specialized in affordable housing and utilizing a new tech platform that allowed tenants to pay monthly instead of yearly. Richmond would take the burden of risk from the landlord by paying the rent upfront, then dealing directly with the tenant for rent every month. It also allowed for retail investors in the diaspora, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but to purchase property in Nigeria on a controlled platform. The board had loved it, but its execution was contingent on Zuri securing the funding. In the last few months, Tishola had made introductions with several financing institutions in South Africa, Dubai, Switzerland, and London to help her secure cheaper financing for the proposed development. She had finally settled on a private equity firm that had a strong base in South Africa, with its head office in London, and finalizing the agreement had entailed meeting with partners on both continents. Zuri gracefully acknowledged the praise. It was a group effort, sir. I couldn't have pulled it off without you and the team, she said as she looked around the room and acknowledged the other members of her team who had worked tirelessly with her to make this happen. You have definitely earned your promotion to Vice President of Business Development with this win, Mr. Tunde concluded. He switched gears and said, well, Zuri, let's catch you up. We have some good and bad news on the site as well. But all in all, it's progress. Actually, I'll let Obina tell you. Well, we have found an ideal location for the development that seems to be within the budget, Obina said. Okay, that's good news, Zuri said. How many square meters? 16,000, Obina responded. It will be adequate space to develop 250 units of masonette duplexes and 2 and 3 bedroom flats as discussed. Nice, Zuri said. So, what's the bad news? She asked as she searched the faces of her colleagues for answers. The thing is, we've been speaking to the agent for a few weeks now about the structure of the joint ventures we are proposing. Obina looked worried. Yesterday, he finally came back with the terms from the family, and they were not great. How so? Zuri asked. Basically, the Baba and his extended family look like they are going to be an issue. Teju, one of the project managers, chipped in. Please explain, Zuri said. Did you tell him we are giving him 20%, 25 units valued at 500 million in exchange for letting us build on the land? We did, Obina said. But the agents insist that the family also wants a 100 million upfront and want to choose the structure construction company that develops the estate. Are they joking? Zuri gasped. That was outrageous. Yes, it is, Teju concurred. I was just suggesting that we find someone that knows the family better so we can go to get a face to face and negotiate better terms. Do you know the name of the family that owns it? Statue tapped his pen on the table as he asked the question. Yes, sir, Ubina responded. I have been doing some digging and the land belongs to the Sanis. Ha! The Baba is old, Teju said, but I've heard his sons are the ones that control things now, and they are a mess. Maybe we should look for an alternative. Trust me, this is prime real estate, Obina replied. There's nothing like it in the area. The location and access to road is quality. In my opinion, we should do our best to secure it. Zuri was quiet. Just great, she thought. Of course, this would be happening to me just as I wrap up everything. Olumide was her ex and Babasani's second son. It was one thing to field her his cheeky messages and return her his unsolicited gift, but he continued to be a badly behaved, entitled rich kid who certainly thought the world revolved around him. He was certainly not someone she wanted to negotiate with. This was going to be a nightmare. The meeting wrapped up and Zuri headed back to her office. As she tried to call Tishola again to update him on her progress for the second time that day, she was interrupted by Tejiri, her fun, fashionable, over-the-top colleague who loved to gossip. Madam Vice President of Business Development, since this promotion, e be like say you don break bank o, Tejiri exclaimed, turning up his brand of worry pidgin to 11. You dey busy. Today Gucci, tomorrow Chanel, and all those hot outfits from African designers. E be like say you and dat Zazi.com don become best friends. I no sure say na the same office we dey work. I doubt am. Tejiri, what are you about? Zuri giggled. Beyonce no do pass like dis oo. Tejiri laughed in delight. Your fashion game is on another level. Show me the way now. You're a clown, Zuri said, laughing as she walked away. She had avoided answering, but she had to admit that he was right. She had stepped it up a few notches since her promotion, with her personal shopper on her speed dial, sending her regular Instagram posts of designer items. Banke had DM'd her a few pictures of Birkin bags on Instagram with the message, My personal shopper can get this for you for $1,200. It was a steal. The Hermes bag was difficult to find and this particular color was rare, but Banke personal shopper had an in with the stores for which she charged a healthy commission. She didn't feel bad. Life is for the living, and at least she could afford it. Dum, dum. Next, Ladun. As she came out of the elevator, greeting her colleagues as she strolled to her cubicle. Oof! Ladum couldn't help but think the second floor of the office smelled of instant coffee and disappointment. It had been 8 months at this job, but she still dreaded coming into work every morning. She hated the humdrum work she was doing advertising sales, but most of all, she hated the people and the politics. Ladum often wondered whether a career in advertising suited her personality. However, her family needed a paycheck. After the death of her father-in-law and a series of financial debacle, debacle, debacle that followed, their lives had changed dramatically. But his father's death had exposed a black hole at the center of all the words that came with the Ashonis family name. Legal battles had ensued between the family company and its creditors, as well as lawsuits between family members who couldn't agree who owned what. It was a nightmare. To Ladun's embarrassment, it had become a huge financial mess that had been splashed across the front pages of the major newspapers, causing her to be shunned in certain social circles. Fortunately, she had zero time to dwell on her social standing because she and Bode had soon realized that not only was there no real succession plan in place, their personal net worth was nearly non existent. Everything they owned was somehow tied to his father's wealth. Even Bode's house and cars were in the company's name. The quarterly dividends Bode had been receiving from the family's company largely covered their holidays and lifestyle expenses. But after the bank took over the dividend, which promptly were promptly stopped. With all the assets tied up, they were broke. The bank had repossessed their Banana Island home and auctioned it alongside other family-owned properties to pay off Bode's father's debt. They downsized their living in a mansion in the most luxurious suburb in Lagos with a 10-man staff that was made up of one chef, two drivers, one housekeeper, two nannies, two security guards, one steward, and one gardener, to a two-bedroom apartment in an area after Chevron but before Aja. It isn't quite the hood Ladun thought. There were lovely middle-class families that lived in the area, but it was undoubtedly a downgrade compared to the wealthy life she had taken for granted barely 18 months ago. Now she had a girl, Sikira, who came 3 times a week to clean the house and help out with the kids. For the first time since she had married Bode, Ladum had to cook, tidy up, and look after the kids when she picked them up from crèche or from their grandmothers in the evening. Welcome, Madam, Mr. Mrs. Ebonu. Mrs. Ebon said sarcastically. She was Ladum's direct boss and was incredibly petty about arrival times at work. Start time was at 8 every morning, but Ebon prided herself in the fact that she got to the office at 7 without fail. Ladum glanced at her watch. It was 7:50, but there was no need to point it out to her boss that she was early because it would only lead to an insane argument about punctuality. It didn't matter that the only reason Miss Ebon was here at 7 every day was that the lady lived in Egbeda, and if she didn't leave home at the crack of dawn, she would get to the office at well after 9, thanks to the horrors of Lagos traffic. As she put her bag down and settled down in her cubicle, I got it this time. She marveled at the fact that just 6 months ago, getting to work so early in the morning, so effortlessly,
would have been almost impossible for her. She had been a housewife for the last 10 years. The concept of waking up while it was still dark to get the children ready for school and still manage to get to work on time was foreign to her. In her millionaire housewife life, she was only fully awake at 10:30 on most days, unless she had a flight to catch. So at first, the call time for work was a severe and painful struggle, but she got through it, pushing through until it became a routine. The problem was, 8 months into the job, she hated every minute of it. She hated driving half herself in traffic for 2 hours just to get to work. She hated the fact that she worked in a company that had secured big clients in its early days and cemented those relationships to the point that they didn't feel the need to innovate anymore. She hated the fact that people who she reported to seemed unexposed and uneducated, even though ironically they had a million degrees attached to their names. The company was clearly out of touch with the times. At first, she had tried her best to pitch her ideas to Mrs. Abel and other management staff, but after they shushed her for the 100th time, it became clear that her opinion didn't matter, and she focused on doing as she was told from 8 in the morning till she closed at 4. Nothing more, nothing less. On the outside, she acted like it was just a paycheck and she couldn't be bothered, but on the inside, she felt hollow and a little depressed that she was irrelevant in the process. Her job wasn't revolutionary. Her tasks were so mundane they could probably be done by anyone with a high school diploma and a brain. Her phone beeped. A WhatsApp message from Zuri sent to their group. Back in town, join me for drinks after work with Ishola. Good news, deal closed. Bad news, I may need to get back in touch with Onimide. Would fill you in later. Except, hi Ladum, do you have a minute? Said an unfamiliar voice. As she turned around, she realized it was Belema, the boss's daughter. Oh my god, what now? Ladum groaned in her head. Belema had joined the company 2 months ago, and Ladum had done her best to keep her distance because the uncharitable consensus in the office was that she was a spoiled rich kid that had become baby boss in her daddy's company. Some of the top management were up in arms because she had joined as a director for business development and she was barely 30 years old. In Ladum's opinion, the instant promotion had reeked of nepotism. However, when she had discussed it with Bode at home, he had a different view and thought that Balema's Yale degree, as well as experience working in a boutique advertising firm in New York, gave her qualifications for the position. She had every right to be a director in her father's company. Hello, Belema. Of course I do. How can I help you? She said with a smile hoped seemed genuine. Actually, I need more than a second. I'm pulling a few people together to push a new project, and we are having a meeting in the conference room in 10 minutes. I loved the idea you had for Utopia Beauty social media campaign last week, and that sort of fresh thinking would be valuable on this. Ladon looked pleased at the unexpected compliment. Her entire time at the company, the biggest commendation she had ever received from anyone was for making a decent cup of coffee. She must have instinctively looked at Mrs. Ebon because at the moment Belema smiled and said, "It's okay." I gave our managers a heads up that I would be borrowing a few of their people to work on the project for the next couple of weeks, and if things go well, possibly the next couple of months. As Ladon picked up her notebook and walked towards the conference room, she wondered what the new project was about. She had heard chatters around the office that Belema was a bit radical. The exact words were something along the lines of, dis oga pikin think say she still dey America. Someone should tell her dis is Nigeria. That's not how we do things. All dis one she dey talk na Oyibo. Dun dun dun. Next part. Adesua. Adesua. She bounced around the boxing ring on the tip of her toes, her body automatically responding to the count of her trainer. 1, 1, 2, jab, he bellowed. 1, 2, 1, 2, right hook. Adesua couldn't help but feel like she was boxing away her problems. 3 days, her boxing classes at Elite Box Fitness was the only thing that helped release stress and had become her daily morning routine from Monday to Saturday. By the time the class was finished, she was dripping with sweat and her scalp beneath her natural hair, braided all the way to the back, was soaked. Multiple sets of heat plus the lack of air conditioning in the gym, compounded by the humidity, caused everyone to sweat profusely. At the end of every class, she swore she would never do it again, but she enjoyed the sweet pain and it kept her coming back. As she put her boxing gloves in her gym bag and proceeded to haul her body down the stairs to her car, there was a beep from her phone. Her arms felt heavy and non existent as at the same time as she tempted to ignore the text. As she was tempted to ignore the text, but she reached into her side pocket of her bag to see who it was. Her head began to throb as she read the debit alert. 1 million naira. For what exactly? This better not be what I think. Oh, Adesua murmured to herself. She hadn't made any large purchases this week, and she had been very careful with money in the last couple of months because between payment for her IVF and repayment to the bank for the loan she had taken out for Soji and his series of failed businesses a few years ago, she was just keeping her head above water. Her spirit told her that this could only be one thing, but she didn't want to jump into conclusion. Maybe it was a mistake from the bank, because this couldn't be what I suspect it is. It isn't possible. Soji couldn't be that stupid or insensitive for that matter. She ran all through all sorts of scenarios in her head. Adeswa opened the car and got in behind the wheels, placing her gym bag on the floor of the passenger seat beside her and settled into her seat. She put both hands on the steering wheel before taking a deep breath, knowing she would have to be calm to deal with the events that were about to unfold. What possible explanation could Soji have for withdrawing 1 million naira from their joint account without talking to her first? Money he had no part in earning, she foamed. She was so angry, angry with her husband and angry at herself for being foolish enough to trust him again after the taunt he had pulled almost 2 years ago when he emptied her joint account, left her penniless and ran off with a little twat Chinasa. They were headed for divorce until the slut he had been shacking up with dumped him after he ran out of money. So he had come crawling back to her, claiming it was the devil. At first, she had been resistant to his pleas and constant begging, because deep down in her heart, she knew he only came back because she was his financial clutch, and he didn't love her, not in the real sense of the word. He needed her to maintain the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed and had lost access to when he left her. She knew it would have been better to call it quits after his very public betrayal, but he started going to her parents' house every day to beg with his mother and other family members. Her father had initially been angry and didn't want her to go back to the marriage, but her mother had told her to pray to God to heal her marriage. But like typical Nigerian parents, they eventually instructed her to forgive him. You have a child, Dad told her. It would be foolish to abandon your marriage now for another woman to come and enjoy the fruits of your labor. At first, Adesua had resisted. She didn't know how she was going to resume a marriage that was so broken. A marriage with no trust for the first few weeks after he moved back in. She felt like she was sharing her home with a devil. They lived like strangers, like roommates sharing their individual responsibilities in the household, but with no emotions. However, as months passed by, Soji's good behavior persisted. Her walls began to fall. He would even wake up early to do school runs and pick Junior up from school in the afternoon, so she didn't have to leave work. He would leave little surprises on her pillow in the morning, like a single red rose with a note underneath it. I love you forever, Soji. He was no longer hiding in the bathroom to take secret phone calls or staying out late saying he was in a meeting. He was home every single day at 7 at night. He seemed to be making a deliberate effort to find a job, and Adesua was happy. She felt as though the guy she had fallen in love with was back. She didn't mind that she still had all financial responsibilities, just as long as he was faithful and he showed that he loved her and was committed to their family. However, her happiness was short lived. They had decided to try for a second child, which had spelled the beginning of the end as they began to deal with all the emotional and financial pressure that came with repeatedly failed IVF treatments. Soji had reverted to being Soji, unavailable, unreliable, dedicated to his baby boy lifestyle. He was out almost every night. Hard Rock Cafe on Wednesdays, Cocoon on Thursdays, Club 57 on Fridays, and Boat Club on Saturdays, and Cocoon again on Sunday nights. It was exhausting. She didn't know how one person could drink that much when they weren't making any money, but she was tired of complaining. She had decided to focus on her life to prevent herself from running mad from frustration. But this is absolutely insane. And that's what I thought as she looked at her phone and confirmed the debit alert for 1 million naira to Cocoon Lagos. Cocoon does this. This one screamed as she banged both her palms in her steering wheel of the car. Frustration. Everyone in the compound was staring at her like a mad woman. She took a few calming breaths, started the car, and drove off. As she drove past Echo Hotel, she fought the urge to call Lara or Zuri. She still hadn't admitted to either friends that Soji was back in the house. She had kept waiting for the right time, but the longer she put it off, the more awkward the conversation would have been. And she was if she told them now, they would only blame her. They had repeatedly told her before the marriage crumbled to remove all her money from the joint account so that Soji wouldn't have access to it. And at first, she had listened, but as Soji's good behavior persisted, she foolishly began to trust him more. As time went on, she had felt quality she had felt quite guilty holding her money in her account. She had convinced herself that if she let go of the past and showed him she trusted him by resuming the use of their joint account, it would help to heal their marriage. She felt like a fool for allowing her parents to convince her that taking that ungrateful bastard back was the right thing to do. Despite his betrayal, more like once beaten, 100 times foolish, she forgave him for all of his transgressions, every single one. Her phone beeped again as she stopped in the traffic light on Ozumbambabwe Road. She turned her phone over and read a message from Soji. My babe, the text read, I'm sure you are still in the gym, but if you get a debit alert for 1 million, don't be alarmed. I can explain. Let's talk tonight. I love you forever. At that moment, she knew she was his enabler, that she had created this monster, this Yoruba demon. She would create this elaborate lie around why this was an emergency or a mistake or the devil, and she would forgive him. It was their way, but it hadn't always been. She sent him a message. Soji, that money was a huge chunk of SJ school fees. Stop. Ding, ding, ding. Next part, Tammy. Oh my god, Tammy, I love it. Amaka squirreled with excitement as she stared at her reflection in the full length mirror in her Echo signature hotel suite. Tammy struggled to maintain a professional demeanor and not sigh simultaneously in frustration and relief as she replied, You are most welcome. Well, that was a surprise, she thought. Given all the tantrums Amaka had thrown in the last couple of weeks, Tammy was convinced that no one living or dead could please this bride. She had changed her mind about the design of the dress at least 5 times. Then she had changed her mind about the fabric. First, satin. Then she wanted lace. Then she came back wanting an entirely new color. As Amaka leaned in to hug her, Tammy tried her best not to grimace and strangle the nightmare of a woman. She was mentally and physically exhausted from dealing with this tyrant bride who had made her life a living hell in the last few weeks and was ready to move on from these incessant phone calls and rants at 2 in the morning and the text messages full of insults and complaints about the dress. It was all too much. I mean, how did one describe a bride calling in the wee hours of the morning to say, I must be plotting against her with her enemies to sabotage her wedding? Tammy thought, all because her dress wouldn't zip up. Was it Tammy's fault that she had obviously been stress eating and gained a few pounds? In the months they had known each other, Amaka's weight had fluctuated all over the place. But instead of coming to terms with that and asking Tammy politely to alter the dress, she dealt with the situation like a person unhinged, kneeling to make some adjustments to the hem. She looked up to observe Amaka in the dress she had spent the last few weeks making. It was beautiful in all its hand-beaded glory. A stunning full-length, form-fitting white lace dress that accentuated all her curves and had a detachable train. It was her second dress for her wedding reception party. The dress was that was short dazzled the guests as she danced into the hall for the first time as Mrs. Igbojekwe. After taking several pictures and going over the final handover notes for the dress, Tammy packed up her things and headed for the door when one of the bridesmaids offered to walk her out. Thank you, Tammy, Stella said as they walked to the elevator together. You have been great, so patient. You're honestly a saint. I don't know how you dealt with that witch. Pardon me, Tammy said, taking her back in shock. She's my friend, but I have to be honest. Just because she's getting married doesn't mean she should treat people like slaves. Her bridesmaids included, she said as she rolled her eyes. She wasn't that bad, Tammy prevaricated. Wasn't that bad? Stella hissed. In some cultures, Amaka's bad attitude could be described as witchcraft. If I were you, I would have refunded her money weeks ago and sacked her as a client. I think she was just under a lot of pressure, Tammy replied diplomatically. She did not want to end up on some thinly veiled Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter post about backbiting designers. Story, Tammy responded. Stella responded. I just hope she doesn't take this bad behavior to her husband's house. It's funny how the badly behaved ones are the ones getting married. Meanwhile, us well behaved women can't find decent husbands. Hmm, Tammy answered non-committed, non-committally as she smiled uncomfortably. It felt like the lift was taking forever to come. As they co- as this conversation was a road to internal social damnation if she wasn't careful. As much as she detested the behavior of brides like Amaka, who- she also hated toxic friends like Stella even more. There was some truth in what she was saying, but she could also smell jealousy. She really wanted to tell Stella that it isn't by force to be friends with Amaka, and she should stop and she should either be loyal or shut up or stop being friends with her instead of all the fakery. Saved by the bell, Tammy thought as her phone rang. Excuse me, I have to take this. Tammy smiled. It's my it's my it's my Altilia. I have a few missed calls from them and I'll just take the stairs. Thanks so much for everything. Have fun at the wedding. She pressed her phone to her ears and hurried towards the stairs. Hello, Basirat. What happened now? You have called me like 3 times. She rushed down the stairs and listened in growing horror as an anxious Basirat dropped yet another piece of bad news. Ma, na the generator oh, Basirat said. It don't stop working since afternoon. We called the generator man again. He said no fix am. He said he no fix am. He said we need to buy a new one. New one care, Tammy sighed, resigned. The number of times they had fixed that generator in the last couple of months had been an indication that it would soon pack up. Ma, we get plenty orders but the tailor no dey work since because no light. Basirat whined. What should we do, ma? This was the thing about running business in Lagos. Just when you thought you were getting out of one wahala, another one will rear its ugly head. From difficult clients to generator packing up, Tammy thought, what a life. Okay, Basirat, I'm coming to the office now. Tell them to hold on. Her car pulled up and she jumped in, making a call to her accountant. Mr. Bola, good afternoon. Mr. Bola's voice came to through faintly on the other end of the phone. Good afternoon, ma. Mr. Bola, you need to buy a new generator, Tammy told him. Ma, there's no money for that though, Mr. Bola said. I checked the balance in the account this morning and I can tell you there isn't enough cash to buy a brand new generator. The best we can afford right now The best we can afford right now is an I better pass my neighbor, and that is not going to be useful given the number of machines that we have. You are funny, Mr. Bola. What do you mean there's no money for that? Tammy said patiently. We've been working non-stop in the last couple of months. So how come there's no money? Ma, the thing is, we spent a lot recently, Mr. Bola said. On the one hand, we just paid off your fabric supplier, salaries and service charge. On the other hand, It is my understanding that a lot of the work you are doing at Irawo is for non-paying clients, celebrities and influencers, ma. Also, the clients that are due to pay have not made full payment, so we have a lot of cash outside, ma. Okay, thank you, Mr. Bola. Let's have a meeting this week to review the books. I need to figure out what is really going on. A frustrated Tammy wrapped up the details and ended the call. In the last 18 months, Tammy had really stepped up her game. She had recognized that despite starting the business years earlier, she had treated it like a hobby, rely on her daddy's money to keep the light on. Iraro had only become something self-sufficient in the last year after she had buckled down and started taking the work seriously. She began to put all her years of going to parties and meeting celebrities and socialites to good use, getting them to wear her designs so they could be photographed and featured in the style section of Bella Niger. And it had worked. The more her designs featured on their website and Instagram page, the more popular Irawo became with Lagos It Girls. In fact, she had grown her Instagram following to about 300,000, experiencing a spike in followers and engagement after she started dressing brides. Business seemed to be booming, but even with the increased demand, something wasn't adding up. She was tired of feeling like a slave in her own business and working long hours with no substantial profits to justify the blood, sweat, tears she had put into it. She loved it all, so she felt terrible complaining. But it had become clear that her business as it stood now would be difficult to scale, even on the good days, with the sweetest brides and the most reasonable celebrity clients. She felt drained as it was. Her business couldn't run without her physical presence, and she knew in her heart that it wasn't sustainable. All the effort she had been putting into her business simply did not match her bank account. Dun, dun, dun. Lara, you look well. Lara, considering the circumstance, Tojo said as he ushered her into his office and closed the door behind them. Please sit down. Thank you, she replied, wishing she could return the compliment. She had never seen Toju look so dishevelled and brown-beaten in all the years she had worked for him. Instead of his unusual well-tailored suit, he was wearing chinos and a wrinkled denim shirt that hung untucked. It didn't even look like he had shaved for the last few days. What's the plan to resolve this, Oga? Lara's voice was filled with forced cheer as she walked to his desk and sat across from him. Look, Lara, Toju said solemnly, I don't want to lie to you. You've been a loyal employee and we've made some good money together, but I don't see a way out of this. I don't understand. I don't see a way out, Toju repeated. The money we invested in OPL 567 to secure constant crude stream for our trading business is gone. The company has completed its drilling program. They made no discovery and revealed two dry holes. Lara put her hands on her chest. That can't be right. Do they have another producing asset that they can pay us back from? She said desperately. No, that was the company's sole asset. But even if it wasn't, we can't do it. We can't do that because each asset is ring fenced, so they can't transfer the profit or loss. Lara sat in shocked silence. So what does this mean for us going forward? Tojo sighed and leaned back on his chair, closing his eyes. This is a cyclical business. We have taken too many losses, and on top of that, I've just been notified that we've been blacklisted by the regulator because we've not been able to meet up with payments. And the banks? I had several meetings with MDs and they refuse to extend our credit. They claim we are over leveraged. Listen, I've done everything I can at this point, but the reality is we're liquid, we're illiquid, and I'm being forced to file for bankruptcy. This is unbelievable. What happens to our back pay? Lara, we are illiquid, Toju said, plainly, even as remorse tinged his tone. I'll sell what I can salvage to pay the staff, but it doesn't look good. I called you in here out of respect for our working relationship over the years. I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Lara stared at him, speechless. I'm sorry this is happening when you just lost your mom, but it couldn't be helped. We made some bad investment and we've just been unlucky. Sorry, Toju, this couldn't be happening at a more impossible time, Lara said as a tear trickled down her cheeks. I barely finished covering the cost of cancer treatment for my mom. Funeral costs are mounting, not to talk of my other financial obligations. My siblings' school fees, for God's sake. I've been living off my savings the last few months in hopes that things will sort themselves out. I've sold stocks. I've been trying and failing at selling the last piece of land I own, even to keep up with my mom's hospital bills and other expenses. I'm wiped out. And now you're telling me I don't have a job? I don't know what to say, Lara, Toju said. I'm sorry I didn't mean for anything like this to happen. At this point, she was at the brink of being hysterical, but as she looked at Toju, she knew he couldn't do anything to help her. She needed to contain her anger, and she needed a plan. She thanked him and left, heading back to her now old office. She collapsed into her chair and tried to gather her thoughts. Tears running down her face, she thought she had cried all the tears she had left when she lost her mother. But this situation was heavy. What am I going to do now, Lara thought. On top of everything else, looking for a job in this economy was a tall order. I haven't been in the job market for at least 7 years. Where do I even begin? Then fear caught her throat as she thought through the ramification of the meeting with Toju. She opened her banking app to look at the balance in her money market account, mentally calculating how much runaway she had before things got there. She ran through some rough calculations about how long her money would last before her expenses overran her income. As she stared at the numbers in front of her, panic began to set in. How did I get into this? She thought. She had spent years working hard and making money. She had saved and invested, but it was clear that she hadn't saved and invested enough compared to her income. She had some real estate holdings, but it was a tight market and they were quite difficult to offload. Even then, her lifestyle cost far exceeded her investment. Her mind wandered to a time similar to this when her father died. She had been quite young, and his death had left Lara, her siblings, and mother in near poverty because he had not had his financial affairs in order. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. The dramatic change in their lifestyle had been a wake up call for her, even at that age. As a family, they had hit rock bottom, but the bitter experience of losing her dad and financial stability in the same blow had helped to build her resilience. As she had gotten older, she had been grateful to have gone through it at a young age because it became her driving force. She had learned two hard lessons: never to depend on anyone but herself for financial stability. And even if she worked hard, it was possible to lose all at any point. The experience had driven her to work harder than anyone in every situation. She had been a single minded student in school and a top employee at work, always closing the biggest deals and gets the biggest bonuses. She was very competitive, but she was mostly competing with her last achievement. The fear of not having or losing it all forced her to keep pushing and building. She had naively thought that loss of her dad and the financial obstacle that had come with it would be the most difficult time she would ever have to face. But she was so wrong. This was worse because she was grown and she knew better. As she stared at the numbers again, she tried to wrap her mind around the undeniable fact that she was broke. Smart money lesson. The rich also cry. At its core, the smart money mantra is not necessarily about being the wealthiest person in the room. It is about learning how to optimize your resource, mastering skill sets you can monetize, cutting expenses ruthlessly on the things you don't care about, and spending intentionally on your goals. It is a concept that encourages you to find strategies to help you cope in times of difficulty and leverage on what you have to get what you want, thereby systematically building the life you desire. In the first book, many were uncomfortable with the fact that the characters, especially Lara, earned high incomes which were not relatable to the average African millennial. My theory, however, is that in Africa, we're in love with the rags to riches story. We want to hear that people who started out with nothing and then told to make phenomenal wealth. That story is inspiring, and it's one that I hope will be repeated a million times more throughout the continent. One has to remember, though, the cautionary words that are the title of Miss Chimamanda Adichie's famous TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story. I want to tell you different kinds of story. The story of what happens when you move to the middle class and have the privilege of making financial choices, and what can happen when you don't have the adequate strategies and the mindset to preserve it. The reality is that most people move from the lower middle income bracket, where financial planning tends to focus solely on earning more as the solution to financial success, to the middle or upper middle income brackets. As people move up, many end up living from paycheck to paycheck because they lack the financial literacy to help them keep and grow their money. We also have to acknowledge that life is in season and the rich also cry. It is possible to earn a high income, not be irresponsible with money, and still find yourself broke. Like in Lara's case, life just happens. When a financial catastrophe occurs, most people tend to find themselves in one of the four categories below, each with their pros and cons. 1. I have arrived syndrome. Sometimes any more doesn't mean you have arrived. You have just received the invitation to the party. Let's say you get a promotion, a new job, sign a new contract, or a windfall hits your business. All of a sudden, you have access to more money, and your brain has shifted gears to I have arrived. 9 times out of 10, you are just pre rich, but you've given yourself license to spend like a billionaire. Your consumption rises to meet your income, and you become a revolving door for your money. So, even if you earn a 1 million naira a month, because you have stepped up your spending to a 1 million naira a month as well, what you have left is zero. So if and when trouble arrives, your high income will not give enough of a cushion to escape being broke because your finances cannot absorb it. 2. Cash rich and asset poor. If we were to access a spectrum of assets according to liquidity, cash would be the most liquid and a small business would be the most illiquid. Treasury bills, stock, bonds, real estate would fall somewhere in the middle. Risk adverse people want to see their money in the bank because they don't want to hear stories that assets devaluation, aka the money you invested can no longer buy what it could be for. While you should have cash on hand for day-to-day living and in case of emergencies, having more cash than assets can put you in financial trouble because while cash is king, cash also loses value over time because liquid assets are more vulnerable to the negative impact of inflation. For example, you could buy more with 1 million naira in 2017 that you can buy in 2019 because with inflation 11.25% in April 2019, goods and services have become more expensive. It is vital to find a balance by investing in assets that either appreciate faster than inflation over time or produce returns that are not entirely eroded by inflation. For example, if the 1 million naira was put in treasury bills with a return of 13% or used to buy land that appreciated by 20% since 2017, having cash that reduces in value over time but not having assets that can protect your financial future can lead to setbacks. Now, there are people on one end of the spectrum that tend to be more cash rich or asset poor because they would rather see their money in the bank and don't want to hear any stories about asset devaluation. The advantage of being cash rich is that there's money in on hand in case of emergencies. However, the disadvantage is that inflation erodes the value of cash over time because it is not being invested in instruments or assets that can hedge against inflation. Asset rich and cash poor. That's number 3. On the other hand, there are those who prefer to invest aggressively and put most of their money in assets for fear that cash on hand will lead to overspending or be eroded by inflation. However, while assessing a spectrum of assets, it is important to note that assets like real estate and small businesses are less liquid than stocks or treasury bills, posing a potential problem if the need for short-term cash flow that were not adequately planned for arises. Also, Africa is a continent of entrepreneurs mainly because the high unemployment rate means that most people start businesses out of necessity to earn a living. Entrepreneurs are risk takers and mostly bet on themselves. Many business owners tend to put the majority of the income they earn back into their businesses without really diversifying because they see their business as their biggest asset. You hear them say things like, why would I invest in Dangote stock when I should be investing in my own business? Which is a fair point. However, the result is that for most of the people in this category, at least 70% of them personal network is tied to their business. Even entrepreneurs with business that have healthy balance sheets, which might look good on paper, but their personal bank account may not reflect that. The reality is in counterparts in the West. The reality is in Africa, small businesses are not as easy to sell as their counterparts in the West. So, although on paper your business might have a decent valuation, if you need cash in a time of crisis, it is sellable or illiquid. Inadequate assets protection in business wealth. We, okay, number four, inadequate asset protection. In in building wealth, we need to also be thinking about asset protection. In Lara's case, health and life insurance for her mother could have helped in cushioning some of the financial blows she suffered. Insurance is not an asset per se, but acts as protection for the asset you have. Exercise. Even when you have a positive net worth, you should ask yourself these questions. How diversified is your portfolio? What type of assets are in your portfolio? How can their liquidity affect the different season in your financial life? That is the end of chapter 1. That was a very long chapter. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.